The airport was packed with passengers, each with their own rush, destination, and story. Sofia walked through the crowd, clutching the strap of her purse like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She was exhausted. Her eyes burned. Her body begged for rest, but this flight was crucial. It was her chance to change her life. She looked at the ticket in her hands. Economy class, seat 27B. A cramped flight, but it was all she could afford with the little money left. After an entire night serving tables at a restaurant, every penny saved was invested in the hope of landing a better job. Her 4-year-old son, Miguel, was at home with a trusted neighbor. She missed him badly, but the sacrifice was necessary. When she finally reached the gate, the line was already moving. Her heart raced. "Ticket and ID, please," the attendant requested. Sofia handed everything over quickly, and minutes later, she was inside the aircraft, walking down the aisle to find her seat. As soon as she spotted it, she felt an immediate discomfort. The upholstery was torn, and the backrest was broken. The seat was reclined as if someone had forced it beyond its limit. "Excuse me, my seat is broken," she called out to a flight attendant, trying to stay calm. The attendant checked the seat, testing the backrest. She tried to adjust it, but nothing changed. "I apologize, ma'am. Unfortunately, this seat is unusable." Sofia felt a lump in her throat. After all the effort to get that ticket, she couldn't be stopped from flying now. "Is there another seat available? I really need to catch this flight." The attendant grabbed a tablet and checked availability. After a few seconds, she looked up at Sofia with a professional smile. "We have a seat available in business class. We can move you there at no extra charge due to the issue with your seat." Sofia's eyes widened. "In business class? Are you sure?" "Yes, ma'am. Please follow me." She hesitated for a moment, but there was no other option. She followed the attendant to the front of the plane, where the seats were wider, more comfortable, and more sophisticated. A luxury she could never afford. The attendant stopped by one of the seats and pointed to it. "Here you go, ma'am. Enjoy your flight." Sofia thanked her and turned to sit down, but froze when she saw the man sitting beside her. He was wearing a suit, impeccably dressed, with an air of natural authority. His gaze was cold, analytical, and the expensive watch on his wrist made it clear he was no ordinary person. The man looked up from his phone and gave Sofia a brief glance. She immediately felt out of place. She didn't belong in that world of luxury, and by the way he looked at her, it seemed like he thought the same. "Excuse me, may I sit here?" she asked, her voice a little hesitant. If the attendant said yes, "I suppose so," he answered dryly, turning his attention back to his phone. Sofia bit her lip, unsure whether to feel relieved or uncomfortable. Carefully, she settled into the seat, feeling the softness of the leather contrasting with the harshness of her reality. The flight began to take off, and she tried to relax. The exhaustion from the sleepless night weighed on her. Even in this unfamiliar environment, sleep came quickly. Without realizing it, her head tilted to the side, directly onto the man's shoulder. The impact was light, but enough for Enrico Salvatore, one of the most powerful businessmen in the country, to raise an eyebrow in surprise. His first instinct was to push her away. He didn't like proximity, especially with strangers invading his space. But as he turned to look at the sleeping woman, he hesitated. She seemed exhausted. The dark circles under her eyes revealed that this wasn't just regular sleep. It was the sleep of someone on the edge. He sighed, looking out the window. For some reason, even he couldn't explain, he didn't move. Time passed, and the plane stabilized mid-flight. Sofia kept sleeping, and Enrico, despite not wanting to admit it, realized that her presence wasn't bothering him as much as it should have. When the attendant passed offering drinks, he discreetly gestured for them not to wake her. After a while, the captain announced the descent. With the noise around, Sofia woke up startled. She blinked a few times, confused, and then realized where she was resting. "Oh my God, I fell asleep," she murmured, putting her hands to her face. Enrico looked at her, a slight smile playing at the corner of his lips. Yes? And it looks like you slept well. She immediately felt embarrassed, straightening up in the seat. I'm sorry. I was just so tired. It's no problem. His voice was calm, but carried an enigmatic tone. Sofia avoided looking directly at him. As soon as the plane landed, she quickly grabbed her purse, ready to get out of there as fast as possible. But as she stood up and began walking down the aisle, she had the strange feeling that the man was still watching her. She didn't know it yet, but that wouldn't be the last time they would meet. Destiny had other plans for them. Sofia stepped off the plane, feeling her heart race strangely. Her mind was still stuck on the awkward moment when she woke up on that man's shoulder. The way he looked at her, that half smile playing on his lips. Why did it still make her feel so uneasy? Stop it, Sofia. He's just a stranger. She hurried to the arrival gate. She needed to grab a taxi quickly and head to her job interview. The watch on her wrist showed she had just over an hour to get to the hotel where the meeting would take place. Airports have always been chaotic, but that morning it seemed like everything was even more intense. People bumped into each other. Bags rolled from one side to the other, and the constant announcements over the loudspeaker only made the environment more confusing. She walked quickly toward the baggage claim area. She stopped by the conveyor belt, trying to ignore the strange feeling that she was still being watched. Taking a deep breath, she adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder and looked around. It was then that her eyes met his once again. Enrico was there, standing just a few meters away. His impeccable suit made him stand out in the crowd. But it wasn't just that. It was the aura of power and mystery he carried. For a moment, Sofia froze. He noticed that she saw him, and without hesitation, walked toward her. She swallowed hard. Apparently, destiny enjoys playing tricks, Enrico remarked with that same calm and confident tone. Or maybe it's just coincidence. Sofia tried to appear indifferent, but something about her was on high alert. He tilted his head slightly, as if analyzing her words. You seem in a hurry. Because I am, she replied quickly, avoiding eye contact. Her suitcase finally appeared on the conveyor. Sofia reached out to grab it, but before she could take hold of the handle, Enrico had already secured it. I'll take care of this, he said, pulling the luggage effortlessly. Sofia frowned. There's no need. I can grab it myself. I know you can. But accepting help isn't a sign of weakness. She narrowed her eyes. And since when are you an expert on this? He gave a slight smile, handing her the suitcase. Since always. But it seems you don't like talking much, so I won't insist. Sofia sighed. It wasn't personal, but she was too nervous about her interview to deal with cryptic conversations with a man who exuded a kind of dangerous confidence. Thanks for the help, but I really need to go. She turned and walked toward the airport. Exit, pulling her suitcase hurriedly. She needed a taxi, and she needed it fast. But once again, it seemed that destiny had other plans. As soon as she stepped outside, she saw a long line of passengers waiting for taxis. Her heart sank. Time was against her. She checked her watch again. If she waited in line, she would definitely be late. Trouble? The deep, controlled voice behind her made her body stiffen. She slowly turned, already knowing who would be there. It's nothing I can't handle, she replied, crossing her arms. Enrico observed her for a moment before shrugging. If you accept a ride, I can take you where you need to go. Sofia blinked, surprised. What? My driver is already waiting. For me, and it seems you're out of time. It's just an offer. Sofia hesitated. Accepting a ride from a stranger, even if he was a man like him, wasn't exactly a sensible idea. But then, she looked again at the giant line. Every second spent there brought her closer to missing her interview. Taking a deep breath, she finally gave in. All right, but only because I'm really late. Great choice. He stepped forward and made a subtle gesture with his hand. As if from nowhere, a sleek black car pulled up. Sofia's eyes widened. Of course. Why did I think he would take a taxi like any ordinary person? The driver quickly got out of the car to open the door for them. After you, Enrico said politely. Sofia entered the car and felt the cool air conditioning contrast with the heat outside. The scent of leather mixed with a slight woody fragrance was pleasant. Enrico entered right after, and the car started moving. For a moment, silence reigned between the two. Sofia tried to ignore his presence beside her, but it was impossible. He seemed to own the space, as if even the silence around them belonged to him. Finally, Enrico broke the silence. Job interview? She turned her face to look at him, surprised. How do you know? He shrugged. You're anxious, nervous, and in a hurry. Something important is at stake. And, considering you didn't bring much luggage, it doesn't seem like a leisure trip. Sofia looked at him suspiciously. Are you always like this, analyzing everyone and everything? He smiled slightly. Most people don't like to be analyzed. Are you one of them? Sofia sighed and looked out the window. I guess I don't like being judged. Enrico didn't respond immediately. When he spoke, his voice was softer. I wasn't judging you. I was just trying to understand a bit more about you. Sofia felt something strange in her chest. Why did this man, a complete stranger, make her so uneasy? The car continued through the city. She could see the tall buildings quickly passing by the window. Her heart was racing, but she didn't know if it was because of the interview or because of this man beside her. She only knew one thing. That plane trip hadn't been the end of their encounter. It was just the beginning. The car smoothly glided through the busy streets of the city, passing towering skyscrapers and luxurious storefronts that reflected the morning light. Inside the vehicle, Sofia tried to maintain her composure, but every second beside Enrico made it more difficult. He was there, sitting just inches from her, his presence dominating the space in a silent yet intense way. There was something about him that made the air feel heavier, as if every movement he made was calculated to provoke some reaction. She glanced away and checked her watch. She still had time, but the anxiety wouldn't let her relax. Do you work in finance? Enrico asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Sofia raised an eyebrow, surprised by the question. How did you come to that conclusion? He gave a cornered smile. By your nervousness. People who deal with numbers tend to be like that. Rational, methodical, and uneasy when things are out of control. She crossed her arms, trying to suppress an involuntary smile. Maybe I just don't like missing important appointments. Or maybe you're afraid of not meeting expectations. Sofia narrowed her eyes, assessing him. And what makes you think I'm afraid? Enrico shrugged. People don't notice it, but the way they breathe, how they move their hands, or look away, says a lot about them. Sofia let out a quiet laugh. So, you're some sort of body language expert. Let's just say I've learned to observe. His gaze met hers, and for a moment, Sofia felt like he was seeing far more than he should. Before she could respond, the car slowed down and stopped in front of an imposing building. Sofia exhaled, realizing she had been holding her breath. We're here, the driver announced. Sofia hurriedly grabbed her purse and suitcase. Thank you for the ride, she said quickly, ready to exit the car. But before she could open the door, Enrico gently held her wrist. Wait. She turned, surprised by the unexpected touch. His eyes were fixed on hers, serious and focused. Good luck with the interview. Sofia blinked, feeling an unexpected warmth rush through her body. He released her wrist, and she quickly stepped out of the car, trying to ignore the flutter in her stomach that lingered behind. The building was even more imposing than she had imagined. A uniformed receptionist greeted her with a formal smile. directing her to the elevator that would take her to the penthouse where the interview would take place. Inside the elevator, Sofia took a deep breath, trying to compose herself. What's wrong with me? He's just a stranger who was polite enough to offer me a ride. Nothing more. But why then did she feel like this encounter wasn't over? The interview went better than she expected. The director seemed impressed with her resume and experience. Leaving the building, she felt lighter, relieved. She wasn't sure if she would get the job, but at least she had given her best effort. It was then that she noticed a cafe on the corner and decided to stop for a drink before heading to the hotel where she would be staying. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and warm bread filled her senses as she crossed the door. She chose a table by the window and took out her phone to check her emails while she waited for her order. But as soon as she lifted her gaze, she froze. Enrico was there. Sitting at a table on the other side of the cafe with his back to the entrance, he was intently examining a tablet. He seemed focused, oblivious to the surroundings. Sofia hesitated. The right thing to do would be to ignore him. She didn't want to seem like she was following him, because obviously she wasn't. But before she could make up her mind, Enrico looked up from his tablet and saw her, and smiled. It was a light smile, almost as if he had been expecting to see her there. Sofia sighed. Definitely, this can't be just a coincidence. She picked up her coffee and walked hesitantly toward his table. You know, if I were a suspicious person, I'd say you're following me. Enrico raised an eyebrow, amused. Funny, I was about to say the same about you. Sofia rolled her eyes and laughed. The whole city, and we end up in the same cafe. Again, this is starting to look suspicious, or just inevitable. The casual way he said that made Sofia shiver slightly. Can I sit down? She asked. He gestured to the chair across from him. The table's all yours. And so, the conversation that started on a plane and continued in a car now extended into a cozy cafe in the heart of the city. Sofia didn't know what fate had in store for her and Enrico. But at that moment, for the first time in a long time, she decided not to overthink it. Just feel. Sofia sat across from Enrico in the cafe, her body slightly tense, as if something was stopping her from relaxing completely. He, on the other hand, seemed at ease, as if he were already accustomed to impersonal encounters in places like this. The aroma of coffee, the sound of conversations around them, and the bustle of the city outside were a mix that, in theory, should have made them invisible. Yet everything seemed to conspire to make this encounter feel more intimate than it actually was. So, what's your story, Sofia? Enrico asked casually, as if he was interested but not desperate to know. His tone was curious but also impersonal. She took a sip of her coffee, thinking for a moment before responding. My story? She laughed nervously. I'm just a woman trying to find her place in the world. Nothing too exciting. Enrico smiled, as if he had been expecting that answer. He leaned forward, his eyes analyzing every detail of her. Something about him made Sofia feel vulnerable, as if he knew exactly how to elicit a reaction from her without even trying. I believe everyone has an exciting story, Sofia. The difference is that some prefer not to tell it. He paused, watching her reaction. But that's exactly what attracts me, the complexity behind appearances. Sofia felt a pang of discomfort. How did he manage to be so direct without being invasive? And how somehow did he make her feel like she had been read completely, without even knowing where to start? She straightened in her chair and avoided looking directly at him. I'm just trying to survive each day, Enrico. Life has taught me that things don't always go as expected. Sometimes you have to improvise. Improvise, huh? Enrico repeated with a slight laugh. I'd say you adapt, but the improbable can become your greatest ally. And from what I can see, you're more than prepared for whatever life has in store. Sofia hesitated. This conversation was going in a direction she hadn't expected. What did he want with these words? What did he want from her? Her mind started racing with possibilities and questions she didn't know how to answer. "Do you really think that?" she asked, her tone now more relaxed, trying to regain control of the situation. "I'm not very good at being unpredictable, Enrico. I just know I need to make this work." He smiled, but this time there was something deeper in his gaze. It was as if he knew more than he was saying, and that made her feel, once again, exposed. "I have no doubt that you know how to handle difficult situations, Sofia. But maybe you're lacking a bit of courage to take a path you're not yet willing to walk," Enrico said, his tone soft but firm. She swallowed hard. What did he mean by that? Was he talking about the interview she had just done? Or was there something else behind his words? "You really like to challenge me, don't you?" Sofia asked, trying to mask the impact his words had on her. He shrugged, casual and carefree. "Life is made of challenges, Sofia. Sometimes they come disguised as casual conversations, and other times they are exactly what we need to see ourselves in a new light." That man, with his observant eyes and way of speaking that seemed simple but was loaded with meaning, made her question everything. She thought about herself. She was never the type to let herself be affected easily, but with him, it was different. How did he manage to have this effect on her? "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Sofia said, unsure if she was talking about the conversation, the encounter, or about whatever was making her hesitate deep inside. Enrico watched her for a long moment, the silence between them now thick with tension. He finally broke the silence with a mysterious smile. "Sometimes we need to take one step at a time, Sofia. The important thing is not to stay in the same place. What will you do next?" She felt the weight of that question. Her life was full of uncertainties, and at that moment, the only thing she knew was that she couldn't keep running from opportunities. As much as she wanted to keep her distance, something inside her was being pulled toward him. It wasn't just fate, it wasn't just coincidence. It was the force of something that felt inevitable. "I don't know yet, but I think I'm starting to realize that life has more to offer than I imagined," she answered, her voice softer, as if reflecting on her own words. He smiled, satisfied, but didn't say anything. He just sat there, watching her, as if he had just placed a piece in the puzzle and was waiting for her reaction. Sofia sat in silence for a moment, thinking about everything that had happened, about how much he made her question her own decisions. She was becoming vulnerable in ways she wasn't used to, and that scared her. "I really need to go now," Sofia said, suddenly standing up. Enrico looked at her, as if he knew this was the moment. He didn't try to stop her. He simply watched, with a mysterious look. "See you later, Sofia," he said, his tone soft but loaded with a meaning she still didn't completely understand. She gave him one last look before leaving the cafe. What did that encounter mean? What would be the next step? She didn't know. But there was one thing she was sure of. Enrico had entered her life in a way that she could no longer ignore. Sofia's phone rang as she was leaving the hotel, ready to begin another day of interviews and meetings. She didn't expect that ring to be as important as it actually was. The name of the human resources manager from the company appeared on the screen. With a nervous sigh, she answered, "Hello, Sofia. How are you? This is Marcos from Talent Tech. I have some great news for you. You've been selected for the position of project coordinator." Sofia swallowed hard, a mix of surprise and relief taking over her. The interview had gone well, but she wasn't sure she had stood out enough to be chosen. Yet here was the confirmation that her perseverance had paid off. "Really? I can't believe it. That's amazing, Marcos. Yes, for sure. We'll be expecting you to start tomorrow, okay? The first day will be dedicated to onboarding, and you'll get to meet the team and the company structure. We're very happy to have you with us." Sofia couldn't hide the joy in her voice. It was a golden opportunity, the chance to finally take a big step in her career. As she ended the call, she took a deep breath and smiled, excited about what was to come. But little did she know, fate still had plans in store. The next day, Sofia arrived at the Talent Tech building with her heart racing. The building was imposing and modern, with large glass windows that reflected the blue sky. She stood still for a moment, gazing at the facade, trying to absorb the magnitude of the opportunity in her hands. She entered the building and was greeted by a friendly receptionist who guided her to the onboarding room. When introduced to all the new employees, Sofia realized the environment was more relaxed than she had expected. People greeted each other with smiles, and there was a sense of camaraderie and collaboration in the air. What surprised her the most was the transparency with which information was shared and how much the company seemed to care about its employees' well-being. It was all very different from what she had experienced in her previous jobs. She was excited, but a hint of nervousness still made her feel a little out of place. She sat in one of the chairs in the meeting room, waiting for the CEO's presentation. She had heard a lot about him, but never imagined that he would be someone she knew personally. The door opened, and a commanding presence entered the room. Everyone stood up instantly, as if an authority figure was entering. Sofia, reflexively, stood as well. Her eyes met the man who had just entered, and her mind needed a few seconds to process what she was seeing. It was Enrico, the man she had met under such casual circumstances, was the CEO of Talent Tech. He was wearing a suit, his posture upright, and his intense gaze now more focused than ever. The shock that ran through Sofia was indescribable. How could he be the CEO? He seemed so accessible, so relaxed. Enrico looked directly at Sofia, and their eyes, which she had already seen before, locked on hers for a moment, as if he, too, was surprised to see her there. A slight smile appeared on his lips, but soon he turned to the audience, beginning his presentation. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Talent Tech. I'm Enrico Salvatore, the CEO of the company. It's a pleasure to have you with us. Let's begin with a brief presentation about our vision and how each of you will fit into this great project. Sofia tried to control her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. The meeting began, but her mind was completely distracted. What was he doing there? How could he be the CEO? He was so human, so accessible. It was hard to reconcile the image of him as the Enrico from the cafe and the Enrico from the conference room. She couldn't take her eyes off him. His voice was now serious and authoritative, his presence more intense than ever. But there was something in that gaze she couldn't identify. He watched her with an almost unsettling concentration, but without saying a word. During the meeting, Enrico spoke about the company's challenges, the importance of innovation and teamwork. He went over technical details of the projects, but Sofia barely paid attention. The shock of seeing Enrico there, in front of everyone, consumed her. She couldn't understand how she had ended up in that moment, after a simple encounter on the plane. After the meeting, people began to disperse. Sofia was still frozen by the revelation. She grabbed her folder and stood up, trying to discreetly move away, but not before Enrico called her. Sofia. She turned, her body freezing in place. He was there, in the center of the room, waiting for her with that familiar gaze. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" Sofia swallowed hard and approached him, feeling a weight in her stomach. What did he want? She started, trying to find words. "I didn't know you." Enrico interrupted her with a slight laugh. "Yes, I'm the CEO of the company. Don't worry, there's no need for formality. I just hope that now you understand me a little better." He watched her, as if waiting for something from her. Sofia felt a warmth rise through her body, a mixture of confusion and something else. She didn't know how to respond. "This is so unexpected," she murmured, unsure how to process the situation. Enrico gave a small, enigmatic smile. I know. But as I mentioned before, life has its surprises, Sofia. Let's see where this takes us." And with that, he stepped away, leaving Sofia there, lost in her own thoughts. She was in the middle of a whirlwind of emotions, but one thing was certain. The connection between her and Enrico was far from over. The move to the new city was one of the hardest yet most liberating decisions Sofia had ever made. Life in her old city no longer offered the opportunities she needed, and the prospect of a fresh start, a new job, and a new environment for Miguel motivated her to move forward. Even with the emotional weight of leaving behind friends and everything she had built, she knew this was the moment to take a risk. Sofia spent the first few days organizing the new apartment, a small 2-bedroom unit, enough for her and Miguel. The furniture was simple, but new, and she worked hard to make the space feel like home. It felt strange, but at the same time, comforting, as if she was not only starting over in her professional life, but in her personal life too. Miguel seemed excited about the move. He loved the new apartment, and although he missed his old school and friends, he was adjusting well to the new routine. Sofia, on her part, wanted him to have a better life experience, one that was calmer and filled with more opportunities. She knew this change wasn't just for her, but for him as well. The salary she was now receiving from Talent Tech was more than enough to cover the living expenses in the city and still allow her to invest in Miguel's future. She found a nearby school with good references and enrolled him immediately. The smile on Miguel's face when he was accepted into the new school brought Sofia a sense of relief, as if all her efforts had been worth it. He was ready to grow and learn, and so was she. Her first days at Talent Tech were intense. Sofia spent the first few weeks absorbing information, getting to know the teams, and familiarizing herself with the corporate culture. She gave her best effort, always focused on ensuring everything she did was well done. Her work was being noticed, and she was earning the respect of her colleagues, and most importantly, Enrico. The relationship between Sofia and Enrico, which had started with a strange connection on the flight and evolved into a shocking revelation about his position as CEO, began to intensify. Although they only saw each other in professional settings, the tension between them was palpable. There was something in every exchanged glance, in every word spoken, that gave Sofia the feeling that he wanted more than just to be her CEO. And somehow, she felt the same way. However, Sofia kept her distance. She knew she shouldn't allow herself to be swayed by this kind of connection at work, especially with someone as powerful as Enrico. There was so much at stake, so much to lose. Her new life, her son, her new job, all of it depended on her ability to stay focused and make the right decisions. One late afternoon, after a long day of work, Sofia decided she needed a break. She picked up Miguel from school, and the two of them went to a park near their apartment. Miguel ran off to play with the other kids, while Sofia watched him from a distance. A shy smile appeared on her face as she thought about how much her life had changed. Perhaps moving to the city had been the best decision she could have made. When Sofia's phone buzzed in her pocket, she looked down and saw Enrico's name on the screen. It was a simple message. "How are you settling into the city? If you need anything, let me know." Sofia hesitated for a moment before replying. Her relationship with Enrico, though still professional, was already beginning to take on a more personal tone. It was hard for her to remain indifferent to him, but at the same time, she knew she couldn't allow herself to be influenced by her emotions. She replied quickly, "All good, thank you. We're settling in well." Enrico's reply came shortly. "I'm glad to hear that. If you need anything, I'm here." Sofia felt a slight tension in her chest. The feeling that he was always nearby, even if it was just through messages, made her heart race. Something in his behavior was starting to change her, and she didn't know how to deal with it. Work at Talent Tech continued to be an emotional roller coaster. Enrico was attentive, but always with a sense of distance. He seemed to have a natural magnetism that drew everyone around him. but no one else seemed to notice how he treated Sofia differently. They exchanged quick emails, had brief conversations, in the elevator, and sometimes their gazes would meet in the hallways. Every interaction felt loaded, as if there was something more between them that they both tried to ignore. Sofia began to notice how he watched her during meetings. There was curiosity in his gaze, an intensity that made her feel both exposed and at the same time desired. She started questioning whether this attraction was mutual or if she was simply misinterpreting the small gestures he made toward her. One afternoon, when Sofia was working late, Enrico entered the meeting room where she was reviewing some reports. He approached her, his piercing gaze once again meeting hers. "You've been doing a great job, Sofia," he said, in a low voice, but full of meaning. She looked up, surprised by the sincerity in his tone. How much had he really been noticing what she was doing? And what did he truly want? "Thank you, Enrico. I'm just trying to do my best." He gave a slight smile. "I know, and that makes all the difference. You have a bright future here." His tone softened a bit, and for a moment, Sofia caught herself wishing for more than just those words. She wanted something more than just work. She wanted something she didn't know how to define. When Sofia arrived home that day, Miguel was sitting on the couch, his eyes sparkling with excitement. "Mom, guess what? I was chosen for the school play." Sofia smiled, feeling her heart warm with her son's happiness. He was adjusting well to the new life, and that made everything worthwhile. "That's wonderful, Miguel. I knew you'd be amazing." She hugged him, momentarily forgetting the issues that were consuming her, the tension between her and Enrico, how her life seemed to be getting more complicated. But looking at Miguel, she knew she was doing the right thing. All she wanted was the best for him. And maybe it was time to figure out what would be the best for her. The days at Talent Tech dragged on with an intensity Sofia had never experienced before. Each meeting with Enrico, every exchange of glances and words, only heightened the tension between them. She tried to keep her distance, knowing her work was her priority, and that he, as the CEO, couldn't get involved with her like this. But something inside her seemed uncontrollable. There was something about Enrico that attracted her in a way she couldn't deny. The Talent Tech headquarters, located in a modern glass building, was the perfect setting for the subtle game between them. Sofia spent her days absorbing the company's frenetic pace, always with one eye on her work and the other on Enrico, who, discreetly, seemed to pay attention to everything she did. She forced herself to stay focused on her work, but whenever their eyes met, her heart would race. Enrico had a commanding presence. His upright posture, penetrating gaze, and that enigmatic smile that always made her question her own feelings. But she knew she couldn't allow herself to give in to the attraction. She had Miguel to care for, and her new life was just beginning. It was on a hot Wednesday afternoon that the situation finally took an unexpected turn. Sofia was in a meeting with the marketing team, preparing a proposal for a new company project. The atmosphere was relaxed, but she couldn't fully focus on what was being discussed. Her thoughts were on Enrico, who was just a few meters away, in his glass office, watching the meeting through the half-open door. She could feel his eyes on her. When she quickly glanced at him, their gazes met for a brief second, but it was enough to make her body heat up. She immediately looked away, trying to focus on what was being said. But the feeling of being watched was inescapable. He was there, silent, yet his gaze seemed to pierce through every fiber of her being. Sofia didn't know what to do with the growing intensity. With each passing second, it felt like the distance between them was shrinking. It was as if something invisible was pulling them closer. When the meeting ended, she tried to leave quickly, but she was interrupted by a message from Enrico. "I need to talk to you. Can you come to my office?" Sofia's heart raced. She knew she needed to stay calm, but it was impossible to ignore what she was feeling. She was about to face a situation she knew could change everything between them. As she entered Enrico's office, the environment was different than usual. He was standing, looking out the window. The office, usually full of papers and reports, was now quiet, as if the world outside didn't exist. He turned when she entered, and they stared at each other for a moment that seemed to last an eternity. "You've been doing excellent work, Sofia." His voice was low, almost hoarse. Sofia swallowed hard, trying to maintain a professional stance. But she couldn't help but feel her hands tremble slightly. "Thank you, Enrico. I'm doing my best." He took a step toward her, never breaking eye contact. There was something different in his gaze, something more intense. Something that made Sofia feel as if she were being enveloped by an invisible force. "I know." He took another step, now only a few inches away. "But there's something else you're telling me, Sofia." Sofia felt the pressure in her chest grow. He was so close now that she could feel the warmth of his body, the subtle scent of his perfume. It was as if the space between them was shrinking with every second. She knew he felt the same way, but her rational side was trying to take control. "What are you saying?" Sofia tried to keep her voice steady, but she knew she wasn't convincing herself. Enrico smiled, but it wasn't just any smile. It was an enigmatic one, full of unspoken promises. He leaned slightly toward her, and Sofia, unable to resist, took a step back. But he didn't let her retreat far. "I know what's happening between us, Sofia. We don't need to pretend that there isn't something more." His voice was soft, almost like a whisper. Sofia felt her heart beat faster. There was no turning back now. The tension between them, which had been building since the first exchanged glance, was now on the verge of exploding. She wanted to pull away, but something inside her was holding her in place. She tried to speak, but the words failed her. Enrico was now so close that she could feel his breath against her skin. He was there, right in front of her, and Sofia knew she wouldn't be able to resist for much longer. Suddenly, the sound of the door opening made them quickly pull apart. One of the assistants entered, bringing some documents for Enrico. The moment passed like a lightning strike, but the tension that remained in the air between them was palpable. Enrico, with a soft sigh, looked at Sofia, as if silently saying, "This isn't over." "We'll talk later," he said, his tone now firmer. Sofia, still dazed, nodded and quickly left the room, trying to control the emotions that were bubbling inside her. What had just happened? What was going on with her? In the hallway, she leaned against the wall, trying to catch her breath. The shock was still there, but there was something else, something she could no longer ignore. The attraction to Enrico was taking on proportions she had never imagined. She knew there was no turning back now. Things were changing, and from that moment on, the line between the professional and the personal was growing thinner. The rest of the day passed in a whirlwind for Sofia. She tried to focus on work, but the image of Enrico, the closeness between them, wouldn't leave her mind. Something had shifted in that moment, and she didn't know how to handle it. When she got home, Miguel greeted her with a smile, telling her about his day at school. Sofia smiled back at him, but her mind was elsewhere. She knew she needed some time to understand what was happening, but looking at her son, she knew she couldn't let this emotional whirlwind affect her new life. And yet, something inside her told her that the story between her and Enrico was far from over. The attraction was just beginning, and with it, the possibility of something much deeper. The tension between Sofia and Enrico seemed to grow with each passing day. That uncontrollable feeling of desire, which had started forming months ago, was now evident. Neither of them could hide the attraction they felt for each other anymore. But what was stopping them from taking the final step, from fully giving in to this growing chemistry? It was a Friday afternoon, and Sofia was at the office reviewing some important documents for a meeting the next day. She struggled to stay focused, but Enrico's presence, so close, was impossible to ignore. She knew he was watching her again. He always was, like a constant shadow in her life. Enrico entered her office without warning, as he sometimes did. He approached Sofia with that subtle smile, the one that made her heart race. There was something about him that attracted her in a unique way. She tried to focus on her work, but her eyes inevitably lifted to him, searching for that enigmatic gleam he always held. "Sofia, are you busy?" Enrico's voice was soft, but there was an intensity behind it. He knew she was aware of the tension hanging between them. Sofia, feeling a growing heat on her face, forced herself to keep her composure. "Yes, just a bit more work for today." She smiled, trying to keep the conversation light, but Enrico didn't seem willing to let things remain so impersonal. He moved even closer, until the sound of his breath became noticeable. His proximity made Sofia feel a wave of heat coursing through her body. "You don't have to try so hard, Sofia," he whispered, his eyes locked on hers. The tension between them, always present, now seemed on the verge of exploding. Time seemed to stop. The room was silent, except for the sound of their breathing. Enrico's eyes never left Sofia, and she couldn't look away. More and more, she felt she wouldn't be able to deny what she was feeling. Without a word, Enrico placed one hand on Sofia's face, lightly touching her chin, before moving even closer. She was breathless, her mind spinning with all the possibilities, but something in her heart told her this moment was beyond reason. It was inevitable. And then, as if the universe had finally allowed it, their lips met. An intense, hot kiss, full of desire, but also of a passion that had been repressed for months. The heat of their bodies mingled, and Sofia surrendered to the moment, no longer resisting. When they finally pulled apart, both were panting, their eyes sparkling with the intensity of what they had just experienced. "I can't ignore this anymore," Enrico said, his voice rough but soft. Sofia didn't know how to respond. She felt the same, but she knew complications were not far off. They were breaking down barriers that could no longer be ignored. The next day, Sofia received a surprise. Enrico invited her for a walk in the park. He wanted to meet Miguel, her son, something she knew would happen eventually. She wasn't sure how she felt about it, but something inside her felt that it was the right moment. Their new relationship was becoming more real every day. They met in the park on a sunny day. Sofia was with Miguel, who seemed excited about the idea of spending time outdoors. When Enrico approached, Miguel was curious, but still a bit shy around the man who was becoming more present in his mother's life. Enrico smiled kindly as he approached Miguel. He squatted in front of him, doing his best not to appear intimidating. Sofia watched from a distance, a mix of nervousness and happiness rising in her chest. "Hi, Miguel. I'm Enrico. Your mom's been talking a lot about you," Enrico said with a friendly smile, extending his hand. Miguel hesitated for a moment, but then accepted the gesture. The interaction between them was brief, but significant. Enrico seemed genuinely interested in Sofia's son, which made her heart race. "I really like my video game," Miguel said, with the typical shyness of a child. Sofia smiled, seeing that the interaction was going well. She approached, feeling a lightness in the air. It was as if things were falling into place naturally. Enrico was interested in Miguel, and she could see he was making an effort to be a good influence. As they walked through the park, the afternoon passed peacefully, but something lingered in the air. Sofia didn't know what the future held, but Enrico's presence was changing her world. The next morning, when Sofia arrived at work, something felt different. She sensed a tension in the air, as though she was about to face a new challenge. That's when her phone rang. Looking at the screen, her heart skipped a beat when she saw the name Marcos, her ex-husband. He was back. Marcos had been away for months, and Sofia knew he was never easy to deal with. Now that he was back in town, she feared what he might want. Marcos had always been possessive and controlling, and she knew he wouldn't be happy to hear about her growing relationship. With Enrico, she answered the call cautiously. "Sofia, we need to talk." Marcos's voice made her shiver. He sounded impatient, as if something was happening, something she couldn't predict. "About what?" Sofia replied firmly, trying to remain calm. "About Miguel, and about us," Marcos insisted, trying to pressure her. She felt a wave of discomfort, but she didn't want to show weakness. She knew Enrico was by her side now, and that changed everything. As Sofia tried to keep her composure on the phone, Enrico entered the room. He observed her, noticing the tense expression on her face, and realized something was wrong. He moved closer to her, overhearing part of the conversation, feeling a slight tension growing in the air. When she hung up the phone, Enrico approached without saying a word. His presence alone was enough for Sofia to understand that he already knew what was happening. He was uneasy, as if the call had struck a sensitive nerve, more for him than she had realized. "Who was it?" Enrico asked, his voice heavy with restrained anger. Sofia hesitated, unsure of how to handle the situation. But she knew she couldn't hide anything from him now. "It was Marcos. He's back in town and wants to talk about Miguel," Sofia said, concern evident on her face. Enrico furrowed his brow, the muscles in his body tensing. He didn't like knowing that Marcos, someone who had hurt Sofia before, was back. Something inside him awakened a need to protect and care for Sofia. He wasn't going to let Marcos interfere. "I don't want him anywhere near you, Sofia." Enrico's voice was firm, his determination clear. "You deserve peace, and he won't destroy that. I'll take care of everything." Sofia looked at him, surprised by the intensity of his reaction. Enrico was serious. He wanted to be her support, not just at work, but in life. And at that moment, she realized he was willing to protect what they had, no matter who the enemy was. "I know you want to help, but..." Sofia tried to argue, but Enrico interrupted her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "It doesn't matter what you say, Sofia. I won't let him interfere," he said, his eyes locked on hers with fierce confidence. Sofia, touched by his loyalty, felt something strengthen inside her. Enrico was there, by her side, and in that moment, she knew that their relationship had shifted into something deeper and more serious. He wasn't just a boss or someone she was attracted to. He was someone who wanted to be part of her life, someone willing to fight beside her. As Enrico promised to protect Sofia and Miguel, she knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Marcos's return and the future of their relationship would bring challenges. But one thing was clear. Sofia and Enrico were beginning to form a solid union, based on more than just desire. And Sofia was willing to explore what that meant. The relationship between Sofia and Enrico was evolving each day. What had started as a quiet attraction between them was now an intense flame, fueled by their daily closeness, the discreet touches during meetings, and the private conversations that were becoming more personal and meaningful. More and more, Sofia felt that she was no longer just by the side of a powerful boss, but with a man willing to share her world and, more importantly, her heart. Enrico, for his part, could no longer stay away from her. Every glance, every gesture, every word exchanged between them made his heart race. He found himself more and more involved in Sofia's life. It wasn't just the growing romance, but the desire to protect her, to make sure she was well, safe, and happy. He was falling deeply in love with her, and that could no longer be ignored. It was something he couldn't control, and over time, he realized he didn't want to. However, at the same time, a sense of responsibility grew within him. He knew how fragile Sofia's life had been before he came along, and he knew that Marcos, with his return, could be a threat to everything they were starting to build. Not just as a father to Miguel, but as a man who had finally found what he had always wanted, a true connection with someone. That day at the office was different from all the others. Sofia seemed more relaxed, a shy smile on her lips. She felt that, finally, she was starting to understand what it meant to give herself to genuine love. Enrico didn't pressure her, didn't make her feel uncomfortable. He respected her boundaries, but always showed that he was there to care for and protect her. "I know you have a difficult past, Sofia," Enrico said, as the two of them were alone in his office late at night. They had just finished another important meeting, but the conversation seemed to be taking a different turn. He was opening up, and she felt that he trusted her enough to talk about his insecurities. Sofia looked at him, her expression soft. She knew how much he had dedicated himself to her and to Miguel. But the fact that he was talking about her past, something they never discussed, made her feel vulnerable. "I'm not perfect, Enrico," Sofia replied, her voice soft but with a quiet strength. "But I'll never hide who I am from you. You need to know that, despite everything that happened, I allowed myself to be with you. And that means more than anything I've lived before." Enrico moved closer to her, his imposing presence softened by tenderness. He touched her face with the palm of his hand, feeling the warmth of her skin. It wasn't just the words he spoke that mattered. It was the care in the gesture, the way he treated her, as if she were precious. "You don't need to be perfect, Sofia," he whispered, his eyes fixed on hers. "You just need to be yourself. And believe me, that's already enough for me." Sofia felt her heart race as she heard those words. Enrico made her feel unique, special. It was as if he saw her beyond the scars that life had left on her. He saw her as a strong woman, a woman who could be loved without reservations. The silence between them grew dense, but comfortable. Sofia took a step toward Enrico, and with an impulse she couldn't control, she moved closer to him. Their lips met once more, this time with more intensity, more passion. The kiss was deep, as if they were trying to consume each other. They were no longer holding back, no longer running. The love and attraction they felt were completely on the surface. When the kiss broke, Sofia pulled away slightly, her face flushed, but her eyes shining. "I don't know what to think anymore, Enrico," Sofia said, unable to hide a smile. Enrico looked at her, his eyes full of intensity. He could see how much she was involved with him, and it made her even more attractive in his eyes. He knew it was time to show her that he was more than willing to fully commit to their relationship. He was committed, and that was what he needed her to know. "I know what you're thinking, Sofia," Enrico said, his tone serious but gentle. "I'm here for you, to protect you and Miguel, to be whoever you need me to be." The past few days had been pure fire. The attraction between them was palpable, but what was really happening between Sofia and Enrico wasn't just about physical desire, although that was strong. It was something deeper, an emotional connection that went beyond what they could have imagined at first. That weekend, Enrico insisted that Sofia and Miguel spend the day with him. He wanted to show her that he was willing to be part of her life in a way she had never experienced before. They went to a park downtown where the trees were starting to bloom and the weather was perfect for a peaceful walk. Sofia looked at Enrico with a smile, feeling more comfortable than ever with him. Miguel was happy, running around, enjoying every moment of the day with Enrico, who seemed to be getting along well with the boy. Enrico talked to Miguel about video games, something they both had in common, and Sofia was touched by how much he cared for her son. She never thought she'd have someone by her side who accepted both her and Miguel, someone who was willing to protect them and give everything they had to see them happy. And in that moment, Sofia knew her life had changed forever. As they walked through the park, with Miguel's laughter filling the air, Sofia felt that something deeper had formed between her and Enrico. It wasn't just passion or romance anymore. It was a partnership, a mutual trust that was growing with each passing day. But as their relationship intensified, Sofia knew Challenges were on the horizon. Marcos's return still lingered, and she didn't know what he might try to do to ruin everything they were building. However, with Enrico by her side, she felt she could face anything. Sofia's life seemed to finally be falling into place, but she knew every relationship has its ups and downs, its tests of endurance. She and Enrico were closer than ever, but a new challenge was about to emerge, one that could shake everything they had built so far. Marcos's return, Sofia's ex, wasn't just an inconvenience, but a clear sign that her past still wasn't fully resolved. Sofia was at home, preparing dinner for Miguel, who was excited about the park visit that weekend. She knew that, even though everything seemed fine, the situation with Marcos still bothered her. He had called several times over, the past few weeks, but Sofia hadn't answered. Her heart was no longer with him. It was with Enrico, and that was enough for her. But the memories of her ex-husband and unfulfilled promises were still there in her mind. It was then that Enrico entered through the door, a serious expression on his face. He had something to tell her, something she knew wouldn't be good. "Sofia, we need to talk," Enrico said, his voice firm and tense. Sofia looked at him, her heart racing. He wasn't usually this serious, and the way he approached her so cautiously made her worried. She wiped her hands on the apron while looking at him. "What happened?" Sofia asked, trying to hide the nervousness in her voice. Enrico took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice was grave. "I got a call from Marcos. He's back in town." He paused, watching Sofia's reaction. "He knows you're with someone, and he's not happy about it." Sofia felt her stomach churn at the mention of Marcos's name. Enrico's words hit her like a punch in the stomach. She knew Marcos wouldn't give up easily, but she wasn't prepared for this. "I know. He has the right to know about Miguel. But I don't want him to interfere with what we're building here, Enrico." Sofia replied, trying to keep calm, but her voice trembled. Enrico took a step toward her and took her hands, his eyes locked on hers, conveying an intensity Sofia couldn't ignore. He wanted to be more than just the man by her side. He wanted to be her protection, the strength to face any adversity. "I won't let him interfere in our lives," Enrico said, his voice firm, full of determination. "I'll make sure you and Miguel stay safe, and I'll do whatever it takes for him to know that." Sofia looked at him, her eyes misty with emotion. His words touched her deeply, and she knew Enrico was serious. He was willing to fight for her and for Miguel, and that made her feel protected, more than ever. "I trust you, Enrico," Sofia replied, her voice soft but filled with conviction. "But I need to know that I won't lose you too." Sofia's sincerity touched Enrico in a way he couldn't deny anymore. He pulled her close, enveloping her in a tight hug. There, in that moment, in Enrico's arms, Sofia felt she had found a safe haven. She no longer wanted to look back at the past, and she knew that with him by her side, she could face anything. Miguel entered the room, interrupting the moment. He ran over to Enrico, grabbing his hand with a wide smile. "Enrico, can we play later?" Miguel asked, with the innocence of a child who still believed the world was simple and full of possibilities. Sofia smiled, feeling a mix of happiness and gratitude. She knew that Enrico had become a part of her son's life in a much deeper way than she ever imagined. Enrico knelt down to Miguel's level, gently patting his head. "Sure, Miguel. We'll play," Enrico replied, his voice gentle but full of affection. "Your mom and I have a few things to sort out, but after that, we'll play together, okay?" Miguel nodded and went to his room, leaving Sofia and Enrico alone once more. Sofia watched Enrico, noticing how natural and caring he was with Miguel. She felt a wave of gratitude and love for him. He wasn't just taking care of her, he was taking care of what she loved most, her son. "Enrico, you're already a part of our life," Sofia said, her voice choked. "And I never imagined I'd have someone like you by our side." Enrico looked at her deeply, his eyes full of emotions he could no longer hide. "I can't. Imagine my life without you both," he replied, his eyes fixed on hers. "I'll take care of you and Miguel, always." The evening passed peacefully, but the weight of Marcos's words still lingered in the air. They both knew challenges would come, that his presence might be a constant, but what mattered was that Sofia and Enrico were together, and together they would face anything. That night, as she lay down, Sofia felt that for the first time in a long while, she was truly home. She had found something more valuable than any treasure, a sincere love, protection, and the chance to be happy with a man who loved her unconditionally. Sofia never imagined that after everything she had gone through, she would be here, beside a man who made her feel safe and loved. But despite the growing happiness, a shadow hung over her life. Marcos was back, and that meant her past wasn't completely behind her. The next morning, as she had breakfast with Miguel, her phone vibrated. Marcos's name appeared on the screen, and her heart tightened. Since she found out he was in town, Sofia had avoided contact, but she knew that sooner or later she would have to face him. Enrico noticed her hesitation and set his cup down on the table. "Do you want me to answer?" His voice was calm, but filled with concern. Sofia took a deep breath and shook her head. "No, I'll talk to him myself. I need to end this, once and for all." She stood up and walked to the balcony, where she answered the call. "Marcos, what do you want?" On the other end of the line, his voice sounded arrogant as always. "We need to talk, Sofia, about Miguel." She closed her eyes, trying to stay calm. "You never cared about Miguel. Why now?" Marcos chuckled dryly. "Because now, there's another man in his life. And in yours, too." Sofia felt her blood run, cold. "That's none of your business, Marcos. You abandoned us. You lost the right to interfere in our lives. I'm his father. You're just a man who brought him into this world, but being a father is much more than that." There was a silence on the other end of the line. Then Marcos sighed. "I want to see him." Sofia hesitated. She knew Miguel had the right to know his father, but she also knew Marcos wasn't trustworthy. Before she could respond, she felt a soft hand on her shoulder. Enrico was there, beside her. "You don't have to do this alone," he whispered. Sofia found strength in his eyes and made a decision. "I'll think about your request, Marcos. But on one condition, you'll never threaten me again or try to interfere in my happiness." Marcos scoffed on the other end of the line, but didn't protest. "Fine. I'll wait for your answer." She hung up and let out a long sigh. Enrico wrapped his arms around her, holding her tight. "You were amazing. It was hard, but I needed to close that chapter." He held her face and looked into her eyes. "You don't have to face anything alone. I'm here, always." Sofia smiled, feeling her heart overflow with love. "And I'm grateful for that." Enrico leaned in slowly and kissed her. Unlike all the other kisses they had shared, this one was a kiss of promise, of a future together. In the following days, Sofia reflected on what she would do. In the end, she decided that Miguel should meet Marcos, but in a safe environment with her close by. The meeting was brief, and although Miguel felt a little uncomfortable, he seemed to understand that his biological father was part of his story. But the real father, the one who was present, who played with him, who put him to bed, and who protected him, was Enrico. That night, as they watched Miguel sleep, Enrico held Sofia's hand and whispered, "I want to build a life with you both. I want to be officially his father. I want us to be a family." Tears streamed down Sofia's face. "This is all I've ever wanted." And in that moment, without fear, without insecurity, Sofia knew she had found true love. If you loved this story, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Write in the comments what you thought of this ending and if you'd like to hear more stories like this one.